Alright guys, we're going to show you how we did one of the shots in our Star Fox video today. It is this one right here, where the R-Wing cruises past a building, sort of does a little sonic boom kind of thing, and just shatters the windows and some papers fly out. If we had more time to work on this effect, what would have sold it a little better would be if we had kind of some people standing in some of these windows that you could see once they were shattered, kind of reacting to it. That would definitely make it seem more real. It's all about the layers and the kind of the complexity that you can add to a shot. So what we did was we filmed this in downtown Salt Lake City. We headed down and we just took a few photographs, a few videos, but mostly a lot of photographs of different parts of downtown that were just really cool angles. And the reason why we did some photographs of this stuff is because we could take advantage of the resolution of our cameras. And you know, you punch all the way in on some of this stuff, and this is at full resolution, and we're getting really close to these buildings. So that sort of lets us work, you know, since all these camera moves are in post, that allows us to do a little bit more, be a little bit more flexible with that sort of thing. Had we just filmed this, we wouldn't have been able to, you know, have the advantage of the resolution. So the first thing that we did was we took a photograph, single photograph with a wide angle lens, and we basically luma keyed it so that we removed the entire sky. And I will say that since there is some lens distortion, especially on wide angle lenses, we took this shot into Lightroom first, and then we added the lens profile correction, so that it took out the warping towards the edges, so it was more flat. So as we panned across with the camera, starting up in this area and coming across these buildings, it felt natural. It had the distortion of the camera that we created and not of just the still image itself. So luma keyed out the sky, just really rough. I mean, you look at it up close and it's really not that great, but it's just a quick kind of rough approach here. You want to save yourself some time on things like that. We threw in the background some clouds. Turn off motion blur here. So you see it approach, the R-Wing comes in, and there's sort of the sky that you're looking at. And as we come across, I mean, you see how we were able to pan across and again take advantage of that resolution. We were able to punch in on that image a little bit more and just use the area that we wanted. Now the R-Wing comes across, and right at this point is where it sort of sonic booms and all these windows shatter. Now the windows shattering, essentially what we did was we cut out all of the windows and we replaced them with an interior. So as you can see right here, here's a look at the interior. We added a ceiling because that was what you would see from this angle, with a few office lights to kind of add a little bit of detail, because there's not a lot on the ceiling of an office building and it just looked too monotonous with just the tiling lines going on. What that was essentially this solid that we created, we threw a grid onto. And then on this gray solid, we threw a ramp in here, and so we had a little bit of a gradient so that it gets darker as it gets more inside of the building, which adds just a little bit of depth and a little more believability to it. On top of that, so we had the shattering glass elements, which was actually two different layers of CC pixel poly. One layer for large particles and another layer for smaller particles that was a little more just slightly transparent and just added a little more scattering and chaos to the scene. That was important because pixel poly is great, but sometimes it gets you results that are a little bit too uniform. And so what you want to do is actually layer pixel poly effects so that you can get the kind of complexity that you want to have. So you have to have nice variety in the size of your shattered object. All right, so we have all those elements put together. We we pulled them together, and then the last thing we really needed to do was work on these papers with Trapcode Particular. So we created a particle comp that was very low res, essentially just pictures of paper falling that we cut out. And we had it so you know, just at all these different angles, and each of these lasts for one frame. and it looks like we have 7 frames of these. So there's a variety to the pixels, or to the particles that are going to show up. So we go into particular here, and it doesn't come on until right here. All right, so we have 3 different layers of particular where we're animating these papers coming out, and you'll notice just looking at that layer, they sort of fade in, and with all the chaos and everything going on in the motion blur, you're not going to notice that they just fade in. But so they just sort of kind of appear, and it almost helps that they're coming like into the light and they're looking brighter outside than they looked inside. So we animate the particles per second from 0 up to 90, and then tapers off a little bit so we can get kind of a trail of just a few stragglers behind. The specific numbers that we were using for Trapco particular, we're using a box emitter, and velocity over here we've got 900. The life down here was 4 of the particles, which doesn't really matter that much, except that we had an opacity over life shape running over here. And so if the life was longer, this would take longer to take effect before the death. This would be 0 seconds, this would be 4 seconds. So you see that's controlling the rate at which that's going to pop on. And since the shot's so short, you can change the life to change the rate at which this ramp is taking effect, which is a really useful technique with Trapco in particular. Size of 18 here. Just had the gravity at 100. Right down here, gravity 100. Air resistance of 1. And then we threw in some wind, because there would be wind if something blew past that fast. The wind here, X -55 and Z -20, so they're blowing outwards and to the left. That's essentially it for the particular layers. So you'll just see that they come on and then they sort of drift. And the air resistance is what's kind of allowing them to just float the way that they are. If the air resistance were different, like 0, for example, they would just blast everywhere and it would not look believable, especially at the distance that we are from the camera here. It looks like they're just flying out. That does not look like paper. Air resistance of 1 is what we used, and that gets you kind of the look of paper kind of coming out, and paper does not maintain its momentum very well. It dies really quickly. If the number's too high, however, they just stay too clustered and just is like a static group, and it just doesn't look as dynamic. So we found that an air resistance of 1 was a pretty good balance there. That's essentially the effect. Of course, the most important thing is motion blur. You throw some motion blur on this and all of a sudden everything looks more realistic, especially on a really fast whip band. So this was not really a 3D camera move, except that this R-Wing element was in 3D. Everything else was 2-dimensional, so we just had it placed in 3D space, and the camera animated to follow the R-Wing, and we just moved the buildings around just where they need to be. So sort of kind of a 2.5D approach to things. But if you're doing shots like this, it is very helpful to just take photographs and kind of create your camera moves in post, because it's going to allow you a lot of flexibility. You're not going to have to track things. So all this, the roto on the windows and everything shattering here, that was really straightforward because it was done in its own comp and it didn't have to be tracked to anything. And then of course we get some camera shake in there to really sell what's going on. Generally, what we do for camera shake is Andrew Kramer's approach, where we'll create a slider control and we'll put an expression on the position. Now I've seen people put this expression on the anchor point as well, which allows you to animate the position, keyframe that a little bit, which is really smart if that's something you need to do. But we threw the wiggle expression onto the position. It's 3 comma, and then we pick whipped up to the slider and then closed off with another parentheses. That allowed us to keyframe the slider, and it's going to change the magnitude of the shake so that we can have the slider start at 0 and then jump up to 125 and then kind of taper off. But it doesn't completely taper off in the shot. It tapers off several frames outside of where the shot actually ends. That's basically it. Another important thing whenever you're doing a camera shake in post is to include some rotation, because it can, sometimes you'll feel like you've got enough shake going on, just, you know, putting a wiggle expression on the position or animating the position or whatever way you're doing it. But there should be some rotation going on, because in the real world, if you got hit by a shock wave, or if you were, you know, in an earthquake or whatever it is that's making the camera shake, there would be some pivoting going on. You wouldn't keep it perfectly level with the ground. Sometimes that can look a little bit odd. So what we like to do is kind of start at 0 on the rotation, keyframe it over one direction, in this example 4 degrees, and then back a little bit less, so -1, and then we have it settle back at 0, and that kind of gets like it's correcting itself. So you get shook really hard one direction, a little less to the other direction, and you're kind of able to pull it in and get it under control if you're the cameraman. So that's pretty much how we pulled off this shot. If you guys have any questions about it specifically, I'll be able to run over those with you in the comment section or on our Twitter feed. If you have a specific shot that we've done in a past video and you would like to see our project file for it, go ahead and just let us know, and we'll be happy to show you guys whatever you're most interested in seeing here. We want to do more videos like this in the future, and we're kind of working up our skill level at, you know, destroying cities and having spaceships fly around and stuff like that. Those videos are a lot of fun for us. So anyways, thanks for listening, guys. We will get back at you soon. Later.